Thank you, Gary. Great to be back. I appreciate the warm words. Thank you as well, Pamela, Andy, the whole team. This is as good an operation as there is. It's a real pleasure, as it is always, to be back at the Hans Arnold Center. To prove that I can stumble through some German, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, es ist mir eine Freude und Ehre, heute Abend bei Ihnen zu sein. Ich möchte diese Gelegenheit nutzen, den Mitarbeitern und Freunden der American Academy für ihren Einsatz für die deutsch-amerikanischen Beziehungen zu danken. I just actually did something quite extraordinary, and I should know who sponsored this, but I just did a 15-minute reading of the Bible outside in front of the Neue Synagogue, and I was speaking words in German that I did not know existed. When you get into a religious text, you're in a whole different ballgame, so I'm very happy to have a little bit more straightforward assignment tonight. The Academy has become a very, very special place for Tammy and me. Tammy, you should stand up and take a bow. And my wife, Tammy, the boss, associated with some very, very special memories. Unfortunately, when we first arrived in 2009, Tammy missed the first Fall Fellows presentation because we had house guests. After I came back and reported what a fascinating evening it was, or it had been, and by the way, this is the 5th class that we've been associated with, which is hard to believe. We made sure that our schedules are free for the Fellows presentation, and she put her money where her mouth is because this time we brought our house guests with us. So Al Apolito, my roommate and dear friend from college, it's great to have you with us. Either we're here or we have the fellows for dinner, or we do both, and we love all of it, no matter what. And I know that this class will not disappoint us in any way. What an extraordinary group, my goodness gracious. Apart from the memories of evenings of stimulating discussion, and of course our wonderful 4th of July celebrations, which the Academy so graciously hosts, we also, of course, associate the American Academy with our very dear friend, Richard Holbrooke. In the months after his death, many people around Germany told me what Dick meant to them. Anybody who knew him could not help but be touched by the force and the vitality of his character. The strongest, most meaningful memory I have of him was our very first meeting. It was on October 18th, 1993, the evening before he officially presented his credentials as Ambassador of the United States of America to the Federal Republic of Germany to then Bundespresident Richard von Weizsäcker. The Atlantic-Brücke had arranged a dinner in Bonn in his honor. It was an evening I'll never forget. I remember how inspired I was by this guy, by the strength of the commitment and the breadth of the vision and the depth of the intellect of our new ambassador, his vitality, his energy. I never dreamed that one day, remotely, that I would follow in his footsteps, and I continue to be inspired by his example. What also made that evening a night I'll never forget is first Dick had his mother with him. First time back, I believe, in Germany, since having fled in the 30s. And sadly and tragically, during that dinner, unbeknownst to me, my brother dropped dead. And so that's a night that I'll never forget, and how often we thought of it when Dick was felled almost by the same thing that felled my brother when he passed away last December. And I respect and admire the American Academy because it is a living example of his vitality, energy, commitment, and vision. It sets an example to all those who value the partnership between Germany and the United States. He saw a void. It was, for those of you who have not heard the story before, the pending casing of the colors of our Berlin Brigade here, and he filled it with the help of Tom and Kurt and so many others. All of us, within our own distinct functions, can strengthen and add to the richness of the German-American relationship in this new century. And I have to say, we go to work in our government with less money every day than we had the day before. So the notion that Dick came up with is a notion that I'm sure we're going to continue to go back to and try to read from that playbook and continue to try to find ways to creatively fill voids. Every day, Tammy and I are reminded of that richness when we look at the art on the walls of our residence. It is normal procedure for U.S. ambassadors to showcase American art to grace their official residences during their appointments. The State Department in Washington works with very well-known artists, collectors, and galleries in the United States to make that possible. But Tammy, parentheses, and I thought that it would be much more exciting to work with German galleries and collectors and with younger artists, Americans and Germans, who have lived in each other's country. Actually, it was more Tammy's idea than mine, but we both feel the rotating series of exhibits has been a great success, and I will shamelessly take 50% of the credit. The real success of our art in residence exhibits has been, of course, due to the support and commitment of the artists who went along with the idea, as well as their dealers and collectors. We've worked with the DAAD, who have been terrific, and most recently with the American Academy on the current exhibit, which bears the title Internal External Affairs. It highlights intercultural dialogue. It shows how an exchange of ideas can contribute to mutual understanding and inspire new forms of creativity. In the case of the exhibit, it is the language of art and painting that extends beyond cultural, geographical, and certainly beyond political borders, but that concept works in other areas as well. For example, with music. This past Sunday, along with people across America and around the world, here in Berlin, we commemorated the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Music played an enormous role in all of our events in which the embassy was involved and our consulates, and the intervals between the notes were magical. At the American Church in Berlin-Schöneberg, we held an interfaith service. Among the members of the congregation are some amazingly talented people, and alongside Bundespräsident Christian Wulff, Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle, Altkanzler Gerhard Schröder, and others, we were treated to the most, among other things, the most moving rendition of Amazing Grace that I've ever heard. Later in the afternoon, Klaus Wowereit co-hosted a memorial ceremony at the Rotes Rathaus. At the opening of the ceremony, a string quartet from the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra played as images of 9/11 were projected onto a screen behind the stage. I thought I had never heard a more beautiful piece of music, particularly in that concept, in my entire life. It set the stage perfectly for the rest of the program. A brass quartet, also from the Pittsburgh Symphony, closed the program on an uplifting note, Morning Music, fittingly titled, giving us all the impetus to go forward with our lives and to follow our dreams. Apart from the opening and closing pieces by the orchestra and some remarks from Mayor Wowereit and me, the program was led by young people, and it was for young people. For instance, a great highlight was a group of young kids from a variety of religious backgrounds presented a ballad about tolerance and diversity that was utterly convincing and, most importantly, extremely authentic. And if that weren't enough, later that evening, the entire Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra played at the Philharmonie. It was the final performance of the European tour, and in some strange turn of fate, how lucky were we that the date coincided with 9/11. When guest soloist Anna-Sophie Mutter dedicated a Bach piece to the victims of the attack, the evening was complete. This 10th anniversary of 9/11 was all that we had hoped it would be, a demonstration of the resilience of our communities, of the simple truths that we hold to be self-evident, and here in Germany, our strong relationship, and of course, all with enormous respect to the innocent victims who lost their lives and their families. In Fall Fellows of 2011, this is also what I guess we expect of you. This is what Dick Holbrook would have expected, more importantly, of you. He believed, and I agree, that each of us brings something special to the German-American relationship from which others can learn and profit. This is what has made our partnership so special in the past, and it is what it will make our partnership important and special in the future. We live in a time, needless to say, of great change, and we need to stay ahead of that change. I encourage you to take every advantage of your time here in Berlin. Get out and get involved in the civic and intellectual life. Be careful, though. Some of last year's fellows good-naturedly complained that the ability of fellows to attend rehearsals at the Philharmonie, thanks to a certain person's former career, often made it difficult to get their work done. And the Philharmonie is just one of many temptations in Berlin. I say this to all visiting Americans, be careful out there. It's a wonderful city, but you can get into trouble. And if you do, I'm the guy they call. In a tribute to Dick, Volker Schlöndorff described their adventures together in Berlin. Volker showed him and his wife Kati Martin his Berlin, the Turkish corners of Kreuzberg, the old harbor in Wedding where the Edgar Wallace detective stories were filmed in the 1960s, which is fantastic, the studios in Babelsberg, Tacheles in Mitte. Volker is also our friend. One day, in fact, Tammy and I hope to run a marathon with him. Probably not the Berlin Marathon because we almost died doing that last year. But one of these days, somewhere, somehow, sometime, it will happen. And like Dick and Kati, with a little help from friends, old and new, Tammy and I have also discovered some fascinating corners of Berlin and of Germany. And I think about that, I was triggered by this notion that Volker showing Dick around, which he's told us about so vividly. And I was thinking the places we go, we just love, and it's the neighborhoods that have that extra special buzz to them. Kreuzberg. Tomorrow morning we'll be in Neukölln, where we've been often. We travel all around Berlin to see our kids play soccer. It's one thing that will strike, it's the greenest city with the most water of any big city in the world. I can't tell you how many times I've asked someone, how far outside of Berlin are we? Only to get the answer, actually, sir, we're still in Berlin. We go to the Olympiastadion. I highly recommend that, both for its history and for its football. Union is the other soccer team in town. They play on the other side of town, also an extraordinary experience. The Philharmonie, naturally, running and biking, the diversity of our religious experiences. Today, as I mentioned, on Sunday, as I mentioned. Although we lived in Frankfurt for many years in the 1990s, we've learned so much in Berlin and met so many fascinating and engaged people. The American Academy, I have to say, has played a huge part in that process. We already met several generations of fellows, as I mentioned, and be warned, class of 2011, we will try to pull you into our activities at the embassy. I understand you're in fact visiting, I'm told, next Tuesday and meeting the public affairs staff. I may be lurking. You'll be like Jack Nicholson at the end of that movie when you'll be saying after the 18th time with doing something as 10 seconds from a clean getaway. This year, again, we are truly amazed at the span of topics that are on the Academy's agenda this fall. This is truly what the German-American relationship is all about, and that is exactly what Dick Holbrooke had in mind when he and Henry Kissinger and Tom and Kurt and others founded the American Academy in 1994. This was an important time in history of the transatlantic relationship. Today, we face challenges and changes that we could not have foreseen then. I could add we could not have foreseen most of these even in December of last year. I'm convinced, however, when the definitive history of the early 21st century is written, say perhaps in the mid-century, by a young historian or political scientist who has not even yet been born, and perhaps someone who will ultimately pass through here as a fellow, the transatlantic relationship will certainly have changed and evolved in many important ways, but it will still be a powerful, and I would argue the powerful force in the world. I told you earlier about how I spent Sunday. In conclusion, let me tell you now about how I spent Monday, the day after 9/11. I had two fascinating discussions about globalization and global governance with two very different groups of people. The first, a group of idealistic but nevertheless pragmatic young experts in the field of development. They were Mercator Stiftung fellows, and again, Dick would have loved them. The second group comprised members of the Hanover Industry Club and regional members of the American Chamber of Commerce in Lower Saxony. I talked with both groups about the future, about how the future would not only be about the next big thing, it would also be about capturing the world's imagination. For decades, the next big thing in terms of technology has indeed come out of America or Europe. And for centuries, much of the prevailing so-called global discourse has taken part in Western countries and has been dominated by them. The West's version of history has influenced the global mass media, the film industry, the music industry, fashion, and virtually every other international narrative. The emergence of the internet, social media, and cable television offers us a broader discourse, but our large economies, strong military presences, proactive diplomatic initiatives, popular soft power, and in an innovative technology, and most importantly, our willingness to engage with the world and the world's willingness to engage with us will both challenge and enrich the special status of the transatlantic partnership 50 years from now. I'll give a shameless shout out to the Hasso-Plattner Institute, where Tammy and I and Al spent this morning looking at understanding where technology is headed, but also cross-fertilization of design and how thinking is going forward. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. That is part of both the legacy and the challenge of the American Academy. As incoming fellows, each of you has made that legacy and that challenge yours. I look forward to an interesting evening and one that offers, through your work, a completely different perspective about the world in which we live. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.